Assalamu alaikum guys. Shara Magomedov just beat Michel Pereira in a really underwhelming performance. Like honestly, bro, I was hoping from the first bell that this guy breaks Michel Pereira's face and absolutely makes him bleed, makes him suffer. But unfortunately, it was a beat down, yes, but it was I can't really call it a one-sided beat down because it was somewhat of a close 29-28. In my opinion, the third down was it was clearly Shara's, but I would get why you would give it to Pereira, but the thing is, I was just really hoping that Michel Pereira gets his face crumbled once again. But yeah, anyways, continuing onwards, right? This in my opinion highlights a bigger issue, the problem with Dana White hyping up these contenders. Now I know there is a need for superstars in this sport, and superstars are born as prospects, right? For example, Sean O'Malley, right? But these guys, right, Chara Magomedov, Bonical, even though Bonical still has yet to show it, these guys, some of, like, not just some of them, most of them actually, when they are on the coming, right, when they're up and comers, right, they usually have flashy knockouts and like all personas. But once they get to the top, like let's just say top 15, even once they get to the top 15, or start getting ranked opponents, and for it took a bit late for Sean O'Malley to do it. But once they face something that's uh, like actually competitive fights, and not stylistically easy fights, they usually struggle a lot to keep that level of superstardom. Like for example, we are seeing that with Shara Magomedov here, right? Like for example, in the undercard of UFC 308, I believe, right, when Shara Magomedov has had his last knockout win, I believe. It was that a double strike, spinning knockout, and that was obviously a spectacular knockout. Really enjoyed the knockout. People were hyped after seeing that, and people are exciting. People are excited. People are expecting that from him. Moving forward, right? Like when he actually fights ranked opponents, right? People are expecting to see knockouts like those, and that's where the hype came, right? That's why I was excited to see Shara's fight today, but after that, obviously, his fights with, for example, MVP, honestly, it was like, I know people like to call it a stylistic masterclass. And even though it was a bit of a it was a bit of a it was a fun scrap, let's just say. But now we are into, now Shara is having fights like this, right? Like, I won't say that it's completely boring, or it was a snooze fest, because I do. And for example, round two was pretty entertaining in my opinion, and Shara did land the most amount of significant strikes among all of the rounds, so it was quite entertaining. But the thing is, it's just the hype is pretty much dead, bro. Like, I don't think he will get another knockout for a long time, for at least 2 or 3 fights, let's just say, especially if he is still consistently fighting hungry contenders, right? As far as Michel Pereira goes, I have a lot to say about this guy. I hope this guy gets banned from the UFC and never gets to fight in this organization. But he's just a scumbag, bro, honestly. Like, I usually don't like to talk shit or talk bad about people, but this guy absolutely deserves it, bro. Like, I really wanted to see his face all ballooned up, yeah, tonight. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. But for example, I believe in his last fight he got submitted, right? And that was really satisfying to see, especially that smirk coming off his face, right? But honestly, I just hope he gets beat up. That's the scene. And I like even talking about him, from this point onward, is it's just complete waste of time. He people say he did impressive. Yeah, I mean, against Shara it's good, but it's just we are expecting more from Shara, right? Shara should live up to the hype, and this isn't living up to the hype, bro. There was a close fight, bro. Come on. And as I said, the third round even was pretty competitive, let's be honest. And also, in the first round, right, when Shara got caught, right, that Shara is pretty lucky that he was able to hang on. And because like, there was, let's say, a 20% chance that the referee could have would have called the fight off. So I mean, fair enough. I mean, I'm not making any assumptions, but it just is what it is. We have to put it for what it is, right? And in terms of what's next for Shara Magomedov, honestly, you could give him someone like Robocop, or Robocop. He's I mean, if he still wants to fight, right? Or someone like Jared Cannonier, right? Like someone who is either a ranked guy, or he can fight to get a ranked spot. And honestly, I just feel like at this point, the the bullet train for Shara Magomedov, right? he just slowed down and will continue to slow down. Like his progression from being a prospect to an actual ranked, taken as a serious contender, that's just that difference is just it just gotten way bigger now, especially after seeing that performance, right? I won't write him off completely yet as a completely boring fighter or anything, but he just is what it is. But yeah, anyways, that's my take on this, guys. You guys definitely make sure what you guys think, and inshallah I'll see you guys next time. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.